All right, we are live. What is up, everybody? All right. So a couple days ago, we did an episode on team building for the Seahawks offense. We sort of went through position by position. What were the needs? What were, in my opinion, some of the areas of priority level in terms of voids and how the team could address those voids via draft, free agency, potential trades, or like the internal free agents, right? Restricted or unrestricted, just as kind of like a quick overcap, um, we sort of name dropped a few high price free agents on the offensive line. We didn't really think that it was super optimal. It might be a day one or day two move to get an offensive tackle, preferably day two, and then going with like a free agent like an AJ Green for your wide receiver three spot. That was just kind of what we talked about. Again, I appreciate everybody who joined last week. We had a few people in the chat. Derek, Make Plays, Fiddles, I think is Josh. Just a couple people from Seahawks Twitter. I really wasn't expecting anybody to join at all. So that was really cool to have you guys in there. Hopefully we can kind of grow this and keep evolving it. For those who weren't here last week, I mentioned like my vision is to sort of not just make it a structured podcast type thing being on Twitch. I want it to somewhat involve gaming with some of the guys at Seahawks Twitter or other guests. It doesn't always have to be just football talk. But I'm just trying this different platform, right? Everybody's kind of got their own niche, and we're gonna roll with it. We're gonna make it better as time goes on. But yeah, so yeah, we got a couple things going on today. Seattle Dragons playing at 2 o'clock against the Tampa Bay Vipers. I know everybody's kind of been excited about that home opener. Heard it sold out like twice, like they had to open up seats a couple times, like more seats. So I'm expecting a pretty good turnout. And just really quickly on that, I think it's, even if it doesn't play out like a minor league system for the NFL, I think it's really good what they're doing. I think they have better financial backing than that other AAF league or whatever it was called. I like some of the rule changes. I like the extra point rule. So I think it's good. It'll be a great distraction during the NFL offseason, right? So, and then what else was I going to bring up? Oh yeah. I went and got my off topic. I got my hair cut this morning, and just really quickly on barbers. It's like I've only had two my whole life. Prior to moving up here to Washington. For those who don't know, I grew up in Arizona. And so when I got up here, it was like, oh, yeah, I need a barber. And I had asked around, went a few places and just overpaid for like terrible haircuts, right? And then I finally found this guy in Everett. Aaron, he works at this place called Fine Cuts. Great place if you are looking for a barber. This is not an ad, by the way, or like any sort of like promotion, like just genuinely cool dude. I met through a coworker, and he's been hooking it up for a couple months now. Really good dude, Aaron over at Fine Cuts in Everett. If you guys are in that area or looking for a barber, definitely hit me up. I can link you to him. He's a good dude. Anyways, let's get to the topic on hand: team building. And we're gonna focus on the defense this week. In regards to the 2019 Seahawks, I think this was the biggest issue in totality, right? I mean, there were a lot of issues. There were a lot of were lots of areas for a room for improvement. But the defense seemed to be, in my opinion, the biggest thing holding this team back. And we're going to start on what is the highest priority this offseason. The defensive line, in particular the pass rush. You currently are looking at not very many. There's only 3 under contract right now, and obviously this is going to change. Excuse me, as the offseason goes on. But you've got Rasheem Green and L.J. Collier, and just a guy. I don't even want to butcher the name. First name Pita, under contract. He's a really undersized defensive end, 6'1", like 240, I think. So you don't really have anybody there right now. As we've been kind of like drilling it for even since before the season ended, Jadeveon Clowney is the top priority extension for this team. The range that you probably get him back at is somewhere in the 20 to 22. I lean on the high side. If Frank got, 21 or 21.5, I think as the market progresses, right, you're going to see an increase in averages per year. And Clowney might yield $22 million. It might take that much. It probably will take that much to get him back. And I think the team will spend. I don't think I think they've gotten a little too cute with it. And even though they've sort of like addressed it with trying to draft guys each year and bring in free agents and making this trade, they sort of haven't really got it figured out, right? We're still in a position where, despite them giving so much attention to adding, we've got these voids. So Clowney is a top priority add. We didn't get much out of Ansah. I think the guy should probably retire with the kinds of injuries that he's had. It just doesn't seem like he's ever going to be fully healthy again. And at his age, you got to start to think about your long-term health. When you start having stingers and neck, shoulder area issues, like, you really don't want to mess with that, right? So as a first rounder, that guy made, plenty of money in his career. I think he can walk away from the game, saying he left it out on the field, hopefully with no regret. So you're not going to get him back is the only reason why I bring him up. The low-key reacquisition that you need is Quentin Jefferson. I think for the last 2 years now, he's been a really great rotational pass rusher. He's a guy that you got every dime that you paid him was well worth it. It's kind of a catch-22 because I don't want to overpay a guy like that, and I want him back, but I also would be like ecstatic for him if he got out to the market and some team, gave him a great contract. Like, I'm never mad about losing a player in that fashion. Like, go get your money, dude. Like, this league is, your opportunities are few and far between. So just go, I wouldn't be upset at all if Q Jeff was not around. And again, at the same time, like I said, I don't want to overspend, but I'd love to have him back. I don't know what that looks like, if that's like a $5 million a year type contract. If we look at what he made last year, I was just looking at defensive end free agents on Spot Track. Let's see here. Quentin Jefferson. He made a couple $1 million. So he made, $2 million last year. Let's see what their market value says. They say he's a $5.1 million. And again, these are rough. These aren't like, obviously for sure. This is just kind of projection. And I think that's fair. If he got $5 million a year, that would be life-changing for a guy like that, right? A fifth rounder. He has made a couple $1 million in this league. Like, that would be awesome for him. I'd be happy if Seattle got him back for that. But at 26, he's probably looking for like a long-term deal, multi-year deal. Spot Track has a market value like a 4-year, $20 million deal. Obviously, it's like, 5 a year. I think that's fair. But you need more than just Quentin Jefferson, right? And I've heard some people you need more than Clowney too. And I've heard some people say, well, you got the cap space this year. Um, why don't you go out and get the two big names, which seem to be Yannick Ngakoue and your guy Jadeveon Clowney? There are a couple other names in there, but I think like Eric Armstead, but he's not going to get away from San Francisco. Those are the seem to be the two names, right? Clowney and Ngakoue. You're not gonna, in my opinion, you're not gonna get both of those guys, and that's spending a lot of money. It's you're committing to guaranteeing, like I would say, two. Even as good as those players have been, it's just too risky to, in my opinion, lock up that many guarantees with two defensive players. You can get value in mid-tier talent. You can get value in veterans on shorter-term deals, and I think that's what the Seahawks want to do here. You got one big fish, either Ngakoue or Clowney. I've looked at guys like maybe like a Shaq Lawson, who's looking to get paid at 26. He had 7 sacks last year, almost 20 quarterback hits. That guy doesn't want to stay in Buffalo. You know, even though they made the playoffs last year, nobody wants to stay in Buffalo long term. It would be cool to see a guy like Shaq Lawson get in here. Another low-key name was Emmanuel Ogbah, second rounder, a handful of years back. He was with the Chiefs, I believe, last year. Chris Jones is another big name, but I think he's a cog for the Chiefs. I don't think they let him get away. And then, of course, there's been talk recently of some reunions in either like a Michael Bennett or a Bruce Irvin. And I think last year I would have said, no, I don't think there's any validity to like a Michael Bennett acquisition. But now I don't, for whatever reason, I don't have any reason. I don't know why, but I feel like now maybe enough time's passed. I heard a comment earlier by John Clayton. He was talking with somebody on the phone about, has enough time passed with Michael Bennett? Could they get over whatever the issues were internally? And he correlated it with the Marshawn Lynch thing, right? So Marshawn was also another guy that, a lot of people labeled a headache for the staff. And you would have never thought that once he was gone that he'd be back, but yet he came back. And he sounded different, right? He was still Marshawn, but he was a couple years older and wiser, right? When in the limited fashion that he spoke, he sounded like a different guy. Like he had matured. He was a different person. I kind of wonder with Michael Bennett, I don't think he's going to change too much either, right? He's a genuine guy. He's not going to change for anybody else. At 34 years old, you kind of wonder where the market value is for him. He made $8.3 million last year. He had 7 sacks. That's more than anybody on the Seahawks had last year. For a 1-year deal, could you get this guy for, $5-6 million? Is that fair? I don't know. But if you could, I'm just saying in contract-wise, it doesn't even have to be Michael Bennett. It could be Bruce. It could be somebody else. If you could get, you need to get. Let me reword that. You need to get a second-tier pass rush in addition to a big acquisition like an Ngakoue or a Clowney. You need multiple guys. I would say you need like 3 pass rushers, right? You've got Green and Collier now. Green, he showed some life, right? He looked like he appeared as though he had improved a lot this last year, particularly in the last quarter of the season. He started to make an impact. We didn't see much of Collier, and that was a disappointment. But I would say don't give up on Collier just yet. and we'll get to it when we get to like defensive tackles, but I have an idea that I've been tossing around with Griff and some of the other guys about Collier. But I wouldn't give up on Collier just yet. But not to ramble on, but what I was trying to say was even with Green, Collier, you and a Clowney, you still need maybe 2 more pass rushers. And that's why I think, a Bruce or a Bennett, a Shaq Lawson, if you wanted to go a younger guy that is going to cost you a little bit more. Obviously, there's name value with a guy like Vic Beasley. He had 8 sacks last year, a couple forced fumbles. I don't know what his true market value is going to be. If it's in that 7 to 8 million, I don't know if that's fair at his age. He's 28. I don't know if that's fair to say that he's a sub $10 million guy. But if he is, that'd be a name that I'd look out for. Robert Quinn, he had a phenomenal season last year. He's definitely going to be, one of the top experienced veterans that gets signed pretty quickly. Shaq Lawson's kind of a guy that I got my mind on, and Ogba, like I said. Those are 2 younger guys, 26 years old, each of them. Highly drafted, kind of low-key. They didn't really become superstars, but I remember them having the physical traits to play, and so I wonder what I wonder about them. At a fair price, how they could impact this defense. I'd like to see it. Defensive tackle. You've got Poona Ford as your starting defensive tackle right now, as it stands. You've got the ghost in Nas Jones. Whatever happened to him, I have no idea. He looked so promising that first year. Not so promising, but you saw a glimpse that we were looking forward to his sophomore season, right? We saw him as a guy that was potentially going to be an impact player. I don't want to speculate on, there's been some rumors about, I don't know what his I don't even want to speculate. Just in terms of his personal status, that's for lack of a better term. I don't know if he's dealing with more than just bodily injuries. I don't know if there's mentally, if something's wrong with becoming a professional, and I'm butchering this, right? The speed of the game, being a pro, all that comes with being an NFL athlete. This is all speculation, right? None of this is public stuff, but it just, when things like this happen where guys are just ghosted, it happened with the end of Thomas Rawls. It happened with, there's another name that I'm missing, but there's just a couple guys. It just seems like they all of a sudden they get ghosted and they get put on IR. They get shelved for minor injuries that they could definitely come back in the middle of the season for, and it's just weird, right? So I don't know what the status of Nas Jones is. Let's just make that the overwhelming or underlying theme with him. We don't have anybody. That's the point I'm trying to make, other than Poona. So Jaron Reed, we've talked about other contracts, comparing contracts, what he could potentially make. Is he a $15 million guy? Is he above or below that number? Is he a Grady Jarrett type? Is he due a Grady Jarrett type contract? And then there's the more moral thing, right? People that didn't want to see Frank around for reasons are probably looking at Reed and in a similar boat, right? Objectively, if we just keep it at that, the football player, which I know is hard to do nowadays, but if we just focus on who he is as a football player, and we know we're getting him for 16 games, that's a player that you want on your team, right? And the importance in all of this is, which is maybe the most overwhelming part of why the defense was so, in my opinion, bad last year. The team didn't get pass rush with 4 guys. I think that is the root cause of so many issues with this defense. It's not a heavy blitzing team. And when Seattle can't get pressure with 4, their zone coverage gets just Swiss cheesed. It's not just that the talent is not the same as it was in the heyday, right? It's the lack of pressure with 4. When they get pressure with 4, they're just a phenomenal team. So if Poona Ford has developed a pass rush, that's huge. But you've already got voids on the outside at the defensive end. If you can't retain Reed, you've got a big void there. That's a high priority, in my opinion. You need to get some interior pass rush. Now, this is completely just like my opinion. I think LJ Collier has the body type, he has the frame and the skill set to be a guy that you could add a little bit more weight to and use as like a 3-tech pass rush, a defensive tackle. Some people will disagree with that. I think many people would probably disagree with that. And I can't say that I'm going off like anything other than a hunch, right? Because at TCU, he played strictly defensive end. For any of the draftniks that watched his film, you know that he was never used as a defensive tackle. So really, it's really me just sizing up the guy, saying I think his body type, he looks more like a 3-tech pass rusher to me. His skill set, that's what it looks like to me, as opposed to, a longer, taller 5-tech. He just looks like a guy that could slide inside. That's just my opinion, and I think he could help out there. I personally would like to see Reed back at a good price, because I think you're just putting you're creating a void. Well, you're not creating a void. He's a free agent, but it's just you're too light on defensive line, and I know that this team has to get pressure with 4. So the guys that you have at defensive tackle right now are all pluggers. They're run blockers. They're not pass rushers. So that's objectively why I think you've got to make some room for Reed. I don't want to overpay him, but again, you could say that about anybody, right? I don't sound intellectual by saying don't overpay. Like that goes for everybody. You don't want to overpay at any position other than maybe quarterback, right? So I'll get more into defensive or like college prospects. I haven't looked at a lot of defensive ends yet. I know a popular guy is the kid from Penn State. I believe it's pronounced Yetur Gross-Matos. He looks like a guy with a massive wingspan. I don't know if he's as athletic as, like, say, the Montez Sweat was last year. But this is a guy that's, I think, projected to be somewhere in the mid to late first round. Correct me if I'm wrong, chat. He's a guy that if he tests well, you could probably say sayonara to the chances at drafting him. A good combine test would probably ascend him into the top half of the first round. And I just don't see Seattle trading up even with the draft capital that they have. I know some people think that this is the year to do it. And I just maybe they're right. Maybe it is the year, but I just tend to go with the history of this front office. And they don't like to move up in day one. If they move up, it's got to be at least day 2, day 3. So Gross-Matos is a guy that seems to be popular in Seahawks Twitter. I've taken a look at his film. He looks pretty good, pretty productive. The thing that stuck out to me, though, was his interview. I saw an interview. They did ESPN or somebody did a profile on him. And this is a well-spoken, mature kid, and a lot of that has to do with his past and what he's endured. The profile took a step into his past childhood. It talked about him losing his father in a boating accident when he was a kid. He had Yetur had fallen in the water, and his grandfather or his uncle and his father went in to save him or something. They didn't really go into detail, but in this boating accident, his father ended up passing away. And then some years later, his brother and him were at a park or somewhere, and it was storming, and he was with his brother right next to him, and his brother went back to the field to pick something up at the baseball field or something. I can't remember, quote unquote, but he said the brother went back and told him to stay at the car. And when his brother went back to the park, he got struck by a bolt of lightning, and it killed him instantly. And so he just felt like, not that he could have done anything different or that he was guilty of their deaths, but he lives with this sort of like, why not me? Why was I saved? Or why didn't I go instead of my brother or my father? And so he's kind of lived with this chip on his shoulder that he has to pay off, right, what he does on the football field for them. So it was a really cool profile. If you get a chance to check that out, it's like one of the, if you just YouTube his name, Yetur Gross-Matos, it's like one of the most popular videos. It stuck out to me, and I thought that was something that the Seahawks would obviously love, right? When they talk about smart, tough, reliable, they want to see a kid that's overcome something. The maturation that comes along with enduring hardship as a youth goes a long way in Seattle's evaluation process of college athletes. 08 Eater, welcome to the chat, dude. Thanks for watching. You say Josh Jones and Josh Uke are names well popular too on Seahawks Twitter. I'll have to check them out, man. Like I said, I'm just getting started on sort of my evals. I like to wait until around the combine to really get into it. I know there are a couple popular names floating around, and so that's kind of where I start. But it's going to be an exciting year, man, right? Because we got all this draft capital, we've got money, and we've got a lot of moves we got to make, right? If we want to keep this playoff window open, or not really open, but take the next step, right? We don't want to go backwards. The last 2 years, we've been in the wild card, then the divisional round, right? The expectation next year is not going to be any lower. It's going to be higher, right? It's going to be conference championship, Super Bowl, despite losing these players. So it's exciting times, man. The like I said last episode, the NFL offseason is super exciting to me. Team building is super exciting to people. So in the next couple of months, this chatter is just going to get super hot. Everybody's going to be talking about it. But yeah, Josh Jones and Josh Uke, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Let me know if I'm not. Uke. I'll have to check those guys out. Linebackers, I don't think it's a high priority. I've heard some people say that KJ Wright is a potential cap casualty. Here on my spreadsheet, I don't have him as a cap casualty. I think he played well enough to keep him around, and he's one of those guys that's earned. There are very few players that sort of have earned the right to kind of keep their bread, so to speak, at least for another year. And I think he's one of those guys that just does everything right. He's never complained once. He's always practiced. He's been relatively available despite having a lot of issues with his knee. Him and Bobby have such a great chemistry. I don't know that you really want to cut him just to save money and then create a positional void where you need to find a starter. I talked about this last episode. When you cut people just for cap, you really got to have a plan. when you cut starters, you create starting voids, and that just adds more to the plate of what you need to address in the offseason. I think KJ Wright's spot, I don't think we want to worry about this year. I think you want to worry about that next year. I think you're starting 3 linebackers, obviously. I don't think you get Michael Kendricks back. It's Wright, Wagner, and Barton. And Barton played fantastic last year. I think there were some ups and downs, but his pass coverage ability was like, so it surprised me, right? Like, for a rookie, his understanding of the defense and just like him being highly trainable, those are good signs that he's going to be a good player for a long time. I've got Shaquem Griffin as an outside linebacker for now, but I think they permanently moved him to like a situational pass rusher, so maybe I need to move him over. Again, I don't think it's a high priority add. Maybe you add a couple undrafted free agents or vets just for depth, but yeah, I don't see that being like a top or a higher mid-level priority until next year. Though I did want to talk about the base versus 11 personnel. We ran so much base defense last year. If there's one thing that I think the coaching staff should be fairly criticized for, is the frequency of base defense 4-3 alignment versus 11 personnel offenses. Not only did we fail to get a pass rush with 4 guys, the base defense versus 11 personnel just didn't work. It wasn't good. And I don't know if that was just the lesser of two evils because we didn't have a solid nickel cornerback all year. I'm guessing that's what it is, but I'm not sure. But that experiment, I think, needs to end, and I think you'll see more nickel next year. I just think it was fine. You want to take a risk. You want to see if this works. Cool. It didn't. Move on, right? Let's go back to primarily nickel defense. With the offenses that you're seeing nowadays, 11 personnel is like the most used. And for those who don't know, 11 personnel is 1 running back, 1 tight end, 3 wide receivers. So when you have a slot wide receiver who is typically smaller, shiftier, quicker than it's an athletic mismatch when you have an outside linebacker covering a guy like that. There's ways around that, right? I'm just speaking like man purposes, but for the most part, it's just a it's a mismatch. Either you say nickel position going to be one to watch. Sorry, my English isn't good. Your English is fine, dude. It's good. And I agree. I think the nickel corner position is as moderate to high in terms of the priority level. You've got Ugo Amadi. I guess we can move into corners now. You've got Ugo Amadi as the natural nickel corner right now, just with the guys that you have under contract. I think you need to potentially, not potentially, I think you need to add definitely via trade or a free agent. And I would lead free agent. I want somebody who's experienced in there. I'm not talking about a Jamar Taylor. I'm talking about, when you look at some of the free agents available. If I just pop over here on my other screen, I'm going to look at some of the names. I brought them up earlier. One of the hottest name is Josh Norman. That's not a guy that I'm targeting. Chris Harris, another guy I'm not targeting. I'm not really looking at the top names, right? A Logan Ryan over in Tennessee. I'm not looking at him. But if I drop down to a few of the lower price names, some names that interest me are Jason Verrett. He was on IR for San Francisco last year. He's 29 years old, former first rounder for the Chargers. That's a guy that I wouldn't mind taking a 1-year flyer on. I don't know how well he plays the nickel position. I know originally he was an outside corner, but he's definitely a name that intrigues me. Vernon Hargreaves is going to probably get paid just because of his name value and his age. I don't think he's an interesting name, right? If you were going to spend money, but I think like a Trey Waynes is probably more up Seattle's alley, just in the athletic profile, right? His build. He's an interesting name at 28 years old. Spot Track has his projected salary at $8.4 million. If you do that for 2 years, maybe even 3, give him a decent sized contract, I'd be fine with that. Again, he's more of an outside corner. What we really need is a nickel. So you're not gonna move. Your outside corners, I think, are locked in with Flowers and Griffin. And I know Flowers kind of took a step back this year, but I think we need to show some patience with him. Him starting the amount of games that he has for Seattle is super valuable. It's something that a lot of people don't talk about, but the starting experience he has, I know, is something that Pete Carroll values, and I think we just need to show a little bit more patience with him. I think he'll definitely bounce back this year. I think the game's going to slow down for him. We just want to see the turnovers come, right, for both the corners, not just Flowers, but Shaquille. So, yeah, if we could get a nickel corner situated before the draft, like if we could figure that out in free agency, go into the draft knowing that it's not really a priority. They're not going to take a corner day one already, but not having to prioritize the DB, prioritize nickel corner in the draft. It's just not, I don't think that's something they'll do even in day 2. If we move on to the safeties, our starters are locked in with Quandre Diggs. He was such a key acquisition. Tip your cap to John Schneider for making that happen. He's still under contract for a year at a decent price. Tedrick Thompson is going to be the backup free safety. Bradley McDougald's your starting strong safety, at least for another year. And I've got Marquise Blair as his backup. You notice highlighted in red, I've got Delano Hill as a cut. I do think this is a guy, and it's not just, I don't have anything against the guy, but I think it's in the best interest of not just Seattle, the team, but Lano as well, for the team to cut him, right? Because you've got Blair in front of him, you've got McDougald in front of him, you've not found a solid role for Lano Hill, and he's just buried on the depth chart right now. At his age, he's probably, and with the injuries that he's had, he's probably not going to get very much, not many more opportunities, not many more bites at the apple. So I think Seattle would do him a service by cutting him, paying him out whatever his guarantees are, and letting him go to the free agent market, get picked up by another team for a better chance to compete for a spot on the roster, because at this point I don't see him as a guy that they need to keep around. I think they need to figure out how to get Marquise Blair on the field more. That dude was an impact player, like immediately an impact player. Again, he's got work to do, right? He needs to develop into more than a hammer, a heavy hitter, but he showed some promise there. What else was I going to talk about with safeties? And so, yeah, I don't think this is obvious. This is obviously not a high priority ad. I think you're solid here for another year, similar to the linebacker situation. Quandre Diggs, you'll revisit him potentially getting a contract extension next year, depending on if he's healthy and how he plays. Next year, future state, you're probably going to be seeing Bradley McDougald start to decline. I hate to infer that, but we kind of already seen that to begin. And so you really start talking about future state, maybe one more year of Bradley McDougald, and then Marquise Blair taking over as the starting strong safety in like 2021. So those are like I said, future state acquisitions. It's not going to be a priority add. But overall, this defense needs to be better, right? If we're going to just summarize here and wrap up, this is where the team goes from a divisional round, experience, good coach, good quarterback team that can beat you on any given Sunday to a legit contender. It's the defense, and we can put a blame on Ken Norton, but really he's just, I don't want to say pawn, but he's doing the bidding of Pete Carroll, right? He came up in Pete Carroll's system, so he runs the same defense. So he's just essentially doing the bidding for Pete Carroll, like I said, and you can fire him, but when you talk about replacing him with a familiar name, like say a Wade, you wouldn't do it with like a Wade Phillips. When you hire a Wade Phillips, you're embracing a schematic change. You're embracing the relinquishing of power. Like you would like you would essentially be asking Pete Carroll to give up the reins and his philosophy and defense and giving it to Wade Phillips. Him changing your defense to a 3-4 and him being allowed to call these shots, that just doesn't fly in Seattle, right? There's a philosophy that stems from the head coach, and the coordinators should are complements of the head coach's philosophy. They're not guys that are, like I said, they're not these Wade Phillips, they're not Dick LeBeaus, they're not guys that are given the reins and the head coach can sort of focus his attention elsewhere. So firing Ken Norton you can do it, but you're not going to replace him with a big name. You're just going to replace him with another guy that follows what Pete Carroll wants to do. So it doesn't really matter to me whether they fire Ken Norton or not. I would much rather see him around. I would much rather see the team execute better rather than just put the. I mean, I'm not saying Ken Norton shouldn't own up or be accountable. Right? At the end of the day, he's getting paid a significant amount of money to have his defense prepared to execute. So that's the issue. It's not scheme-wise. I just think the execution needs to better, and a part of that is talent. Part of that is age, right? The youth of the group. A part of that is the injuries that we were having. Clowney was hurt. Once we got Diggs was sort of battling an injury when he came in, and then he battled one, I want to say, while he was here. We sort of had the carousel at outside linebacker. We had voids at nickel corner and on defense. We just couldn't pass rush with four. Not to reiterate too much, but that's the key. If this defense can get pressure on the quarterback with four guys, that's going to make a world of a difference for the secondary, whether they're playing base a bunch again or they line up in nickel defense again. Eater, you said seeing them against the Rams is painful and they need to be better. Do you mean, you're talking about the last couple games? Yeah, I mean, just in general, right? It's not just the Rams games. I think them being in one-score games every week bothered people, right? It was a reoccurring theme, and I think the misconception was that it was just a choice, that Seattle, because they had this elite quarterback, that it was just a choice for them to start scoring more points by passing the ball more or whatever, not just passing the ball more, but it just seemed like people were making too light of the fact that the in-game decisions led to so many one-score games, and that the execution of the players has very little to do with it. I disagree with that statement or that belief. I think it's a bit of, like most things, it's a bit of both, right? The truth is somewhere in between. They didn't dominate teams because they weren't a dominant team. I mean, to me, it's just as simple as that. They didn't have that talented of a team. The fact that they went as far as they did, considering the injuries that they had and the talent level, I think they exceeded most people's expectations. And next year it's going to be the same thing. People are going to have this high standard for Seattle to contend next year, and they might be another year away, right? Even with the cap space and the amount of draft picks they have, they might not necessarily be a contender for another year. You've got a ton of voids that you've got to answer. You've got to fill. Again, you've got the resources to do it, but at this day, February 15, we've got a long off season ahead of us with a lot of work to do, and I think it starts with what we spoke about earlier, taking care of your internal guys first. Get Clowney back, absolutely. Jaron Reed, debatable. Don't overspend, but for a decent, if it's $15 million a year, and that's what it's going to cost you to secure interior pass rush, do it. Do it. Quentin Jefferson, if he goes to the market and it's not as hot as he thinks it is, get him back, pay him $5 million a year. That's fine. Spend the money that you have. Don't create more voids by cutting people like KJ Wright just to save money. If there's a defensive version, I kind of put Justin Britt and KJ Wright in the same boat. They're guys that you could save a lot of money by cutting. They're not like elite players right now at the stage of their careers, but they're cogs. They're guys that add chemistry to the team. Their experience is valuable. What they do is it's just invaluable. It's not necessarily always the production that you want to look to. It's the other things. It's the things that they do for the young guys Monday through Friday that we don't see. We only see the product that the team puts out on Sunday. But there's 5 other days in the week where these guys are together working. And those are the days that, veterans really can make an impact on younger players. So I don't want to ramble too on. Again, I wanted to keep it about an hour with these podcasts. We're going to get into, in the next episodes, we're going to get into a little bit of more of a deeper dive into college prospects as we get closer to the combine. I'm expecting to hear some news in terms of Greg Olson's decision here pretty soon. Hopefully we get some news soon on the internal extensions, sooner rather than later. But again, Eater, I appreciate you hanging out, and anybody else who's tuned in. Don't be shy. Chat. Let's get interactive. I'm never going to ask you guys to donate or contribute or subscribe for me to acknowledge your questions or your comments. I want this to be open. I want this to be sort of a chill environment that we can all kind of come together on a different platform than Twitter or YouTube. Just try something new out here. So again, I appreciate everybody tuning in. And we'll see you guys on Twitter, and we'll talk to you next time. Let's go Dragons. Let's get a dub here. All right, guys. Talk to you later. Thanks.